Good evening. Hope that everyone's had a good afternoon, and it's good to see everyone back with us. We, as is mentioned, got a lower crowd tonight, but regardless, whenever we get a chance to come together and worship the Lord, it's still a great day and a blessed day, and we're worshiping all the same. So, again, thanks for being here tonight, and hope that the day has been good to you, okay? I don't have my microphone tonight. I keep forgetting to take my jacket to the cleaners, and so my voice is a little loud to have the lapel, so I'm trying to speak up. If at any point in time it's not quite loud enough, give me some kind of a signal, and I'll make sure to speak up or go back to the microphone. We'll see how that works. Tonight we're going to continue our Bible study, but our series on the women of the Bible. We started this last month, and I'd actually only gotten one lesson into it back in February because of circumstances in regards to sickness and things like that, health issues, or where I couldn't preach on Sunday night. And we continued this last week. We've looked at two women so far in the Bible, one from the Old Testament and one from the New Testament. And tonight we're going to continue this series, and we're going to stay in the Old Testament by looking at the story of Rahab. It's a very interesting story in regards to who Rahab is and the events that take place and what eventually happens to Rahab in regards to her role in the, not just with the Israelites, but really with Christianity as a whole and her role in that. If you want to go and be turning to Joshua chapter 2, we're going to be looking at several passages out of the Bible tonight. I don't have a whole lot on the board itself, so we're going to be doing a lot of straight reading. And like we have been doing, we're looking first and foremost, who was she? Who was Rahab? If you take a look at Joshua chapter 2, starting at verse 1, it tells us who she is, or at least who she was before these events take place. It says that Joshua, the son of Nun, sent two men as spies secretly to Shittim, saying, "Go, view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and rested there. We see in the very first verse here who Rahab is, or at least, again, who she was before these series of events that take place that we're looking at tonight. We're told in verse 1 that she was a prostitute living in Jericho. Jericho is going to be a nation that the Israelites are eventually going to conquer. Of course, we know what happens to Jericho. We sing the song in regards to this. Dare to stand like Joshua, and the walls of Jericho come tumbling down, and we know what happens, but we're looking at Rahab's role in all those events. And as Rahab is introduced, we see that she was living in Jericho and that it is going to be her home that she has these two Israelite spies that she's going to house. And as you look at the two men here, these two men are going to be spies for the Israelites and spying on Jericho itself with the intention of eventually going in and defeating them. So Rahab is going to house these two men, and we're told that she is a prostitute. Now, that is important, at least in regards to my mind, in regards to who she becomes later on. So we see a woman here who is helping out two Jewish spies. As we continue looking at verse 2 here in Joshua 2, it says, but it was told to the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to spy out the land." And the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to spy out all the land." But the woman had taken the two men and hidden them, and she said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. It came about when it was time to shut the gate at dark, that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them in the stalks of the flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued them on the road to the Jordan, to the crossing places, and as soon as those who were persecuting them had gone out, she shut the gate, or rather they shut the gate. So we see here that Rahab, according to this passage, again, is going to hide the spies, and not just hide them, but hide them from the king of Jericho. You have two Jewish spies, two spies from Israel, who were in Jericho. The king has heard about these spies, and he has sent men out to Rahab's home to ask where the spies were. Now, You can imagine what that would mean in regards to modern day times. We look at modern day movies like Mission Impossible and James Bond, and we see what happens to spies when they're caught. And that's probably what would happen here as well. If these two spies were caught by the king, more than likely they are taken and probably put to death. And if Rahab was caught harboring these spies, then probably she would have been, or rather had the same fate. You harbor spies to your country or to your city or to your town, and you're looking at treasonous acts. And so Rahab is actually putting a whole lot on the line here by protecting these two men. So why is she protecting these two men? Well, we'll get to that here in a little while. But as we continue on looking at the story, let's skip ahead to verse 12. Verse 12, it says, "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth." Now, Rahab is speaking to the two spies here. She says, "And spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters and all who belong to them, and save our lives from death." So the men said to her, "Our life for yours, if you do not tell this business of ours, and it shall become that when the Lord gives us the land, that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you." And Rahab has protected these two spies. And what happens here is that through that protection, she is going to release them out of her home. And she's going to give them instructions as to how to safely leave the city, how to leave the nation, and exactly where to stay until those who are looking for them come back and they're free to go. And she says, "In return to this, if you will, please, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you will deal kindly with me and give me a pledge of truth. Spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters and all who belong to them." She's saying, since I have helped you, will you please, when you return and you overtake us, because they're going to, that you spare me and my household. And they said that because you have looked over us, and if you continue to do so and not turn us in, then that's exactly what's going to happen. And they give her instructions as exactly how to do that. And as we continue looking at verses 15 and 16, it says, "Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, so that she was living on the wall. And she said to them, 'Go to the hill country, so that the pursuers will not encounter you, and hide yourselves there for 3 days until the pursuers return. Then afterward you may go on your way.'" And so she helps these men, these spies that she knows are there against Jericho. She knows what they're there for. She knows what's going to happen in Jericho. As we go back and look at that missing passage that we'll get to in a few minutes. She knows what's going to happen, and yet she helps these men anyway. Imagine someone here in the United States knows that there's a Russian spy or a Chinese spy or North Korean spy, and we let them in, we harbor them, and we know that we're protecting them. Knowing that what they're going to do with that is that they're going to come back and destroy us. What would we do in this situation? What would be our reaction? So why is she harboring these men? Well, she's harboring these men because she knows exactly who they're from. And again, we'll get more into that here in a few minutes. If you will, skip ahead to chapter 6. As we look at the fate of Rahab. What happens to her? What ends up happening to her as these men are going to go back to the Israelites, and as they are going to come back eventually? As we see in chapter 6, starting in verse 12. And it might help if I turn there as well. Starting in verse 12, it says, "Now Joshua got up early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. Then the 7 priests, carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark of the Lord, went on continually and blew the trumpets. And the armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard came after the ark of the Lord, while they continued to blow the trumpets. So the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. And they did the same for 6 days. Then on the 7th day they got up early at the dawning of the day, and marched around the city in the same way 7 times. Only on that day did they march around the cities 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests blew the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, 'Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. But the city shall be designated for destruction. It and everything that is in it belongs to the Lord.'" Let's stop right there. Joshua has come back. Joshua has been given instructions from God as to what to do to destroy the city. They're to march around it for 7 days, and on that 7th day, march around it 7 times. It says that the city walls will come crumbling down. And Joshua says here in verse 17, "The city shall be designated for destruction, Everything that is in it belongs to the Lord. But, there's a big old but here. Let's continue here. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who were with her in the house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. We see everything in Jericho, everybody in Jericho, everything in Jericho is to be destroyed, except for Rahab and her household. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in the house shall live. Everything else is going to be destroyed. But she made that oath with the two spies. She said, please look over my house and my father, my mother, my brothers, and my sisters. And those two spies said that if you'll tie a red string around your window, then we will spare you. And here comes the instructions from Joshua himself. Everything in the city is to be destroyed except for Rahab and her family and everyone that is in her home. Again, given by that symbol. So we see that she's going to be saved. As we continue, verse 21 here. Verse 21 says, they utterly destroyed everything in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox, sheep, and donkey, with the edge of the sword. And Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, go into the prostitute's house and bring the woman and all she has out of here, just as you have sworn to her. So the young men who were spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all she had. They also brought out all her relatives and placed them outside the camp of Israel. So we see that the two spies are going to go back, and they're going to bring her and her family out, and they're going to be saved. It says that they are placed outside the camp of Israel. Everything else in Jericho is to be destroyed. Everything else is to be completely demolished. But again, that oath that she gave to those two spies is going to be fulfilled. They said, if you protected us, if you will continue to protect us, then when we come back, you'll be spared. And that's exactly what happened. It says that they are placed outside the camp. Verse 24 says, then they burned the city with fire and all that was in it. Only the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. However, Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all she had, Joshua spared. And she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent out to spy Jericho. So we see here that in verse 25, that again, Rahab has been spared. And it says that to this day, she has lived in the midst of Israel. So we see who Rahab is. Rahab was, again, we see the word prostitute several times here. We know what her background is. We know what her past is. We know that, again, this is a background that, very questionable, even in today's society, even with all the things that we see around us today. And yet she is the one who spared these two Israelite spies. And it's her life and her family's life that will be spared. So why was this prostitute saved? Out of all the people in Jericho, why would it be this woman? Why is there a point that a prostitute, again, somebody, reputation, questionable, why would she be saved? Because as we go back to chapter 6, verse 25, it says, she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day. Well, as we look at that missing passage in chapter 2, go back and look at verses 8 through 11. I've got on the board here. It says, now before the spies lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have despaired because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, and Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard these reports, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in anyone any longer because of you. For the Lord your God, He is the God in heaven above and on earth below. After the king's men had come to Rahab's home, and says, where are the two spies who have come to you? And she sent them out, saying, they've already gone outside the city. You can go catch them if you hurry. She goes up to the men. Why did Rahab help these men? Maybe it's a better question here. Why did this woman help these men? Why would she risk her own life in regards to helping these two spies, knowing what's going to come? It says here in verse 9, it says, I know that the Lord has given you the land. And then down in verse 11, for the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth below. You see, she's heard about the things that the Israelites had done. She heard about the parting of the Red Sea, about the exodus out of Egypt, and about the Egyptian soldiers perishing in that. It says that we heard about the two kings of the Amorites who you destroyed, Sihon and Og. She says, we've heard about you guys. We've heard about the destruction that comes along with it. We know that you cannot be defeated. Why? Because she says that the Lord has given you the land because your Lord, your God, is the same God in heaven and above. See, this is not just a powerful military that, again, has defeated the almighty Egyptians. This is not just a powerful military like we saw with the Roman Empire or with the Mongols of China or with the United States of World War II or Russia, the Soviet Union of the Cold War with nuclear capabilities. You see, their power came from God. Their victory and success came from God, and she knew it. She recognized it. She knew that these spies weren't just of a foreign nation. She knew that these spies were from a nation, the nation from God. And she knew that there was nothing that she or anybody else could do to stop that. And she recognized that. So why was this prostitute saved? Well, because she recognized that these two men were men from God, and I better side with God because I've seen, or at least I've heard what's happened to those that resist. I better be on the right side of God. And she didn't say these words. I would imagine that's probably what's going through her mind. If that was me, that's what I would be thinking. She said, we've heard about these things. We know what's happened. And we know that since you're here, it means that we're next. And I better be on the right side. Not only be on the right side, but be on the right side with, again, the Lord your God, the God in heaven. See, she recognized the fact that this is not just a powerful army or military. This is the power of God. That's why she helped. Why was she saved? Well, because of her faith in God. In her faith in helping these men out. And that's why she was saved. So then I asked the question, well, what happened next? After Jericho was destroyed, after she was saved, what happens next? Well, I want to go back to verse 25 again of chapter 6. It says, Rahab the prostitute in her father's household, all she had, Joshua spared, and she has lived in the midst of Israel to this day. Which meant that as these words are being written down, as part of Joshua, the book of Joshua, it says, to this day, she has lived in the midst of Israel. That tells us that she never left. That she was placed outside of the Israelite camp as Jericho is being destroyed, and that's where she stayed. She stayed with the Israelites. She didn't go off on her way to live her own life. She stayed with them. And as we look into the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1, we see another big sign as to what happens with Rahab after this. Matthew chapter 1, starting at verse 1, we're looking at the genealogy of Jesus. It says, the record of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac fathered Jacob. Jacob fathered Judah and his brothers. Judah fathered Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez fathered Hezron, and Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz by Rahab. Boaz fathered Obed by Ruth. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David the king. Go back to verse 5. Salmon fathered Boaz by Rahab. And we are given indication that this is exactly the same Rahab that helped these two Israelite spies when they came to seek out Jericho. The same Rahab that was spared by the destruction of Jericho as the Israelites and as Joshua came in. So what happens to Rahab after this? We see that she stays with the Israelites. And that leads me to believe that she then turned her life to God. That would lead me to believe, even though it doesn't say here, and so this is kind of based off my own interpretation of this, it would appear that she began to follow God. So much to the point to where we see her mentioned here in the genealogy of Jesus Christ himself. And that's another fascinating fact here, is that she would have been, if I get this right, the great-great-grandmother of David the king. Or great-great-great. I lose track. But David would have been a direct descendant of Rahab. And of course, we know that Jesus was a direct descendant of David. So think about how this prostitute, who helped these two spies about what her future had in store for her, and what future of the entire world had in store because of that. So again, we're not really told a whole lot about Rahab from this point on, at least not necessarily from what I've seen and read. I just looked at a few different sources here and a few different passages. But we know that Rahab was somebody who, we not just look at this as a story of faith and a story of belief, but a story of someone who, again, would have had to have turned her life to God, and therefore we see the influence by this. Basically, what we see here is that we see someone who gave an example for future generations to follow. As we begin to look at the long-term effects of Rahab and why this story is important, we see that her story isn't just embedded into the book of Joshua. We see her referenced a couple of different times, outside of Matthew, of course, in regards to New Testament. We see Hebrews chapter 11, verse 30, where the Hebrew writer is talking about all these examples of faith. And then verse 30 says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after the Israelites had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. The Hebrew writer giving all these examples of faith, examples like Abraham and Moses, includes the faith of Rahab with it. Again, we see a woman here who is not an Israelite. See a woman here who, again, had a very questionable past. But a woman whose faith in God led her to God. A woman whose faith in God spared her life. Again, she was such an important woman in that the Hebrew writer used her as an example of great faith. The Hebrew writer is not the only one. James also references Rahab. In James chapter 2, verse 24, James is talking about the idea of works and faith and how those two intermingle. And he says in verse 24, you see that a person is justified by works and not faith alone. In the same way, was Rahab the prostitute not justified by works, also as she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. We see two of the most used and most important verses of the entire Bible in regards to how important works is in regards to our faith and in regards to our eternity. And whose example is used in this? The example of Rahab. In the same way, Rahab the prostitute not only justified by works when she helped those spies down. See, she didn't just believe in God, she also acted on it. We talk about the idea of works. We often think about, going and help the sick and going to help buy groceries and going to do this, going to do this. Works is acting out on that faith. Works is acting out on that belief. It's not just sitting there saying, I believe. It's saying, I believe, and I'm going to do everything I can to serve and to help. We talked about that this morning. Serving others. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And Rahab is used for that very example as James is getting the point across that faith without works is dead. Just look at the works that Rahab had in regards to her faith. She believed in God. She believed that the God that helped the Israelites, that the God that destroyed the Egyptians is the same God that's going to help the Israelites destroy her city. And she believes in him, and she's going to do everything she can to make sure that she's on his side. So therefore, she helped those two men. So this is not just an isolated story that we see from the Old Testament. Again, this example is one that was used by New Testament writers, not just in regards to the genealogy of Jesus, but also by the Hebrew writer and by James in looking at a woman of faith, a woman who showed that faith by her works. This is a very important woman. Why was this prostitute so important? As we began to wind down the lesson tonight and to boil this down, again, the word prostitute is used many times in reference to Rahab. And I don't think that is any kind of mistake. I say that because you look at her background, you look at where she came from, and then you look at the great example that she had. You look at the great figure that she had. You look at the importance of what future generations had because of her decisions. And looking at the genealogy of David and Jesus. And understanding that background and where she then went to from that is important. We see God having a plan for everything, and oftentimes we see people who have questionable pasts who then turn around and have not just success stories, but stories that we look at as examples that we should follow. Men like Paul, who was responsible for the killing of so many of the early Christians. And yet look at the great example that he became. So why was this prostitute so important? We got 3 points here, then the lesson is yours. She helped the men of Israel because she believed in the power of God. Again, she was not an Israelite. She was a member of Jericho. It was her city that was about to be invaded and destroyed, and she knew that. She knew that these people were not her own people. She knew that these people were going to destroy her people. Again, I used a reference a few minutes ago. What if we have somebody here in the United States and they come to your house, you know that they're spies, are you going to help them out? Especially knowing that they're going to destroy you. But again, it's her faith in God that led to those decisions. It wasn't necessarily out of fear and that, oh, they're here, I better get on their side. She had faith in the power of God. And it was that faith in God that led her to make that decision. She knew the power of God. She recognized the power of God, and she recognized that the Israelites were God's people, and that's who I need to be with. Number 2, her faith saved her. She had not really seen these events, not that we know of. She said, we have heard about this. We've heard about the Egyptians. We've heard about the Amorites. Word's gotten out. I have no idea whether she saw any of the destruction with her own eyes. Had no idea if maybe she was passing through and saw some of the destruction that was left behind. Rather, she was told, she heard, and again, she believed. It was her faith that saved her. Her faith in that the God that's helping the Israelites is the God of heaven and earth. And I better be with him. She risked death for her own king to follow God's people. Again, if she was caught, no doubt that she'd been put to death. As the guards came to her house, imagine, again, let's say Roman spies are in your house, the United States FBI or Secret Service, or maybe just the Army itself shows up and says, hey, we know the 2 spies are here. Where are they? They're in the back room. Go get them. Because if I'm caught helping them out, I know it's going to happen to me. She didn't do that. She knew that even if it meant death for her, she was going to make sure that she helped out God's people. And her faith is what pointed her to that. And then number 3, she did not abandon her faith. Again, as we're told in later sections and later passages, that she stayed with the Israelites. She's in the genealogy of David and Jesus. She's used as an example by the Hebrew writer and by James. No doubt that she turned that life around. We don't know exactly the details, but I don't think that she would be given as an example if she continued that life that she had lived before this. Because we know that that's not how God works. You can't do whatever you want to. You can't live whatever life you want to and then be saved by God. You've got to follow his rules, his laws. And apparently that's what Rahab did. Her faith in believing in God is what saved her. It says that she stayed with the Israelites, which meant that she would have had to follow the rules of the old law. And because of that, we see what happens next. And think about how history would have been different if it had not been for that. All part of God's plan, yes. But again, we see a woman here who's put in a pretty tough position. And she knew what had to be done in the name of God, and she did it. A woman of faith, a woman of belief, and then acting out on that belief. It's why we had looked at Rahab tonight. And looking at a woman who had a very questionable path. Very questionable past, rather. But rather, leave that behind to make sure that you follow God. And that's a second lesson that we're looking at tonight. No matter where you've been, no matter where you come from, no matter what you have done, it's never too late to follow God. And that brings us to the final thing tonight. As we wrap up the lesson, can we be saved too? If Rahab was saved, if this prostitute was saved, then what kind of hope do we have? Well, we follow the instructions that were given to us. To hear the word of God, to believe in the word of God, to repent of our sins, make a confession that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, and to be baptized for remission of our sins. So he's not cooperating tonight. Be baptized for the remission of our sins. We have been told what we've got to do to be saved. She wasn't really told, as far as we know. She heard and she believed, and therefore she followed. We hear, do we believe, and then do we follow? And how often do we find ourselves not following like we need to? And then after that, be faithful until death. And again, according to what we're told, that's what Rahab did. We're not seeing a woman who continued that questionable lifestyle. I would say that there's no way that could happen. There's no way that could happen and then her be used as a reference so many times as an example. No matter where we come from, we have the opportunity to be saved. If we follow God, if we have faith, and if we follow His words, and if we live a faithful life. Because as it appears, that's what Rahab did. As she let the men down the window, they said, tie a red string around your window. And that will tell us, or scarlet rather. And that will tell us. And sure enough, as they went back into the city, her life and her family's life was spared. Because of her faith in God and in God's people. And then after she was saved, continued to be with those people. We see what happened to her. Again, this is a story and example that we can look at, one that's maybe unconventional, but one that nevertheless tells us exactly who God is. A God that no matter where we come from or what we've done, you got the chance to be saved. Because it all comes down to our decision, our choices as to whether or not be faithful to God. Just as we talked about this morning. This morning we talked about it all comes down to us and our choices. What we can control is what we do. And based off those choices, we have to have faith in God and then follow through on that faith. Not just say that believe it. Anybody can believe. Even Satan believes. But make sure that we follow through on it. Make sure that in our faith, we live out that faith, just as Rahab did. And knowing that no matter where we come from, that God can save us, no matter what we've done. So tonight, if we can help in any way, whether there's someone here tonight who needs to come forward to become a Christian, or whether there's someone here tonight who needs to ask for forgiveness of sins, who needs to ask for prayers in the church, or maybe somebody here tonight is questioning maybe something they've done in the past and thinking there's no way that God can forgive you, there's no way to come back from that. Again, we see that that's just not true. If we can help you in any way tonight, please come as we stand and as we sing.